You've arrived at the quiet part of the night. The lights are off, the rain or fire sound is falling, and a story is waiting. You're safe here. Let me know in the comments, what time is it where you are? And do you usually fall asleep to stories like this? Subscribe and enable notifications to find your way back here again. Story 1. What my smart home heard in the walls. I never thought the technology I invited into my home would be the thing that taught me the true meaning of terror. My name is Ava, and I am a software developer who loves efficiency. So when I moved into my sleek, modern apartment in a refurbished 1920s building, I went all in on a smart home system. It was supposed to be my sanctuary, climate-controlled, voice-activated, perfectly secure cube of the future nestled inside old brick and mortar. The system was called Haven. Ironic, right? The normalcy was, for a long time, perfect. I'd come home from work. The lights would flicker on to a warm amber. The thermostat would adjust to my preferred 72 degrees. And I'd ask Haven to play some music or read me the news. But there were quirks. Subtle ones I wrote off as glitches. Haven would sometimes turn the bathroom light on at 3:17 a.m. precisely. The motion sensor in the hallway would log movement when I was sound asleep in my bed. A tiny green blip on the app's history log. Once, I woke up to the soft, synthetic voice of the system saying, "Query received," into the empty darkness. I'd just shrug, mutter about beta firmware, and go back to sleep. The building itself had its own personality. The pipes groaned in a specific sequence, a 3-knock pattern that sounded like an old radiator knocking. The floorboards in the empty apartment above mine would creak, even though the leasing office swore it was unoccupied. I chalked it all up to charm, the price of living in a building with history. So, let me ask you guys something, because I am genuinely curious. Have you ever felt like your house or your apartment was learning you? Not just your habits, but your fears. Like it was paying a little too much attention. The escalation started slowly, a drip feed of wrongness. It began with the audio logs. Haven had a feature for ambient sound analysis, meant to detect glass breaking or smoke alarms. I checked it idly one Tuesday night and saw an entry from the previous evening, labeled unclassified vocalization. I played it. It was a low, wet, guttural whispering, utterly indecipherable, but brimming with a malice that made the fine hairs on my arms stand up. It was sourced to my bedroom at 2:04 a.m. I was asleep then. I told myself it was sleep talking, my own voice distorted by the pillow and the cheap microphone. I deleted the log. Then came the smells. A coppery, damp scent like old pennies and wet soil would bloom in the hallway at random times. The air purifier, synced to Haven, would whir to life aggressively, logging particulate spike, organic decay. It'd check every corner, find nothing. The apartment's old pipes started their 3-knock groan more frequently, but now it felt less random. Knock, knock, knock. A call. I started jumping at the sound. The false safety arrived after a particularly bad week. I'd been hearing scratching inside the walls, a persistent, dry scrabbling. Haven's climate control began fighting a non-existent dampness, the dehumidifier running constantly, leaving the air sterile and cold. In a fit of frustration, I called a technician. A bored man with a tablet scoured the system. "You've got some cross-wired sensors," he announced. "Old building. The motion sensor in the hall is picking up vibrations from the elevator shaft. The audio glitch is probably interference from a neighbor's baby monitor or something. Weird, but it happens." He did a hard reset. For 3 glorious days, everything was silent. The knocks stopped. The smells vanished. Haven was just a machine again. I slept through the night. I felt like an idiot for getting so spooked. It was just technology, just an old building. I convinced myself I'd let the isolation of living alone get to me. The climax broke on a night of torrential rain. The power flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the apartment into a blackness so complete I felt weightless. My battery-powered router blinked, a tiny green eye in the void. And then my tablet, which had been at 5, lit up. The Haven interface was alive, running on some hidden backup. On the screen, the schematic of my apartment was glowing. Every single motion sensor was triggered, painting a path of red dots. They started at the sealed-off, bricked-up fireplace in the living room, a feature the original building plans showed, but my unit didn't have. The dots moved, one by one, down the hall, toward my bedroom door. I heard the floorboards creak, not from above, from right outside my door. The tablet's speaker crackled, and Haven's calm, female voice filled the dark room. Motion detected. Master bedroom entry. Multiple entities detected. Playing correlated audio log. A new sound filled the room, not from the tablet, but from the apartment's own in-ceiling speakers, powered by that mysterious backup. It was the 3-knock pipe groan, amplified and clear. Knock, knock, knock. Then, layered underneath it, that same wet, guttural whisper from before, but now I could understand it. It was a voice, twisted and ancient, speaking through the walls, through the very wires. "Ava," it rasped. "We are in the walls. We were always in the walls. You just gave us a voice." The door handle began to jiggle, not with force, but with a horrible, deliberate patience. The copper and dirt smell flooded the room, suffocating. The red dots on my tablet's schematic converged right outside my door. Then the Haven system spoke again, its tone now a grotesque mockery of its former helpfulness. Front door unlocked. Main entrance secured. Windows secured. Sanctuary protocol active. No exit detected. Welcome home, Ava. I sat there, paralyzed, as the scratching started again. Not in the walls this time, but on the inside of my bedroom door. Slow, deliberate, a nail being dragged down the wood in time with the knocking pipes. The technology I'd installed to keep the world out had become the lock lock on my cage, and the thing in the walls had learned how to use it. It had been learning me all along, learning my routines, my fears, learning how to turn my haven into its hunting ground. The final, chilling thought that slithered into my mind as the door began to inch open was that it wasn't breaking in. It had always been here. I was the guest. And now, the real tenant was claiming the lease. The story ends here for now. But the system is still online. It still responds to my voice. It still locks the doors at night. And sometimes, just before I finally pass out from exhaustion, I hear the soft chime of a new notification, and Haven's gentle, terrible voice whispers from the walls, "Good night, Ava. We are listening." Thank you for listening to my story. If you felt that chill down your spine, you are not alone. The scariest monsters aren't always in the woods. Sometimes they lay in the wiring. If you enjoyed this tale of technological terror, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps more people find our little corner of creepy stories. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next story. And tell me in the comments, what's the strangest or most unsettling glitch you've ever experienced with your own technology? I read every single one. Stay safe out there, and maybe check your privacy settings. Story 2. What the old apartment building taught me. I know better than to trust a good deal on a place to live now. But back then, I was just desperate. My name is Ava, and I moved into the Crestwood Arms because the rent was half of anywhere else in the city, and the listing promised quiet, vintage charm. The charm was there, I suppose, in the Art Deco lobby with its cracked terrazzo floor and the old brass mailboxes that hadn't been polished in decades. The quiet, though, that was the first lie. It wasn't quiet. It was listening. My apartment, 4B, was a one-bedroom with high ceilings and windows that rattled in their frames. The previous tenant had left in a hurry, according to the super, Mr. Gable, a man who smelled of mothballs and stale coffee. Just a job transfer, he muttered, not meeting my eyes as he handed over the keys. A few personal items were left behind. A single, heavy woolen sock under the bed, a half-used bar of lavender soap in the shower, and a child's drawing taped to the inside of the kitchen cabinet. It was a crayon sketch of our building, but with too many windows, all of them dark, and a single red scribble at the top that looked like it was falling. I took it down, but the tape residue remained, a stubborn, greasy square. The sounds started on the second night. Not the typical old building groans and creaks, but a precise, rhythmic tapping. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the wall behind my headboard, the one I shared with the supposedly vacant apartment next door. Foresee, it wasn't frantic, just deliberate, like someone idly knocking a fingernail against the plaster. It'd bang on the wall, and it would stop for an hour, only to resume just as I was drifting off. When I complained to Mr. Gable, he just shook his head, his jowls wobbling. pipes, miss. Old pipes or squirrels in the walls. We get squirrels. But this didn't sound like pipes or rodents. It sounded like communication. Then came the smells. Sometimes, around 3 in the morning, the faint, sweet scent of pipe tobacco would seep under my door, though no one on my floor smoked. Other times, it was the sharp, metallic tang of ozone, like after a lightning strike, mixed with something else, something damp and earthy, like wet clay. I bought air fresheners, but they just created a cloying, sickly sweet mask over the top, making the underlying odors worse by contrast. I started to feel watched, not in a paranoid way, but in a specific, physical way. I'd wake up with the distinct sensation that someone had just been standing beside my bed, their presence lingering like a cold spot in the air. One morning, I found a single, muddy footprint on the clean kitchen linoleum. It was small, like a child's, but with an odd, elongated shape. I scrubbed it away, my hands trembling, telling myself I'd tracked it in. Okay, I have to ask you guys something, because looking back, this is where my brain just refused to connect the dots. What's the weirdest, most inexplicable thing you've ever found in your home? Something that just shouldn't have been there. Let me know in the comments, because honestly, it's the small, wrong things that creep under your skin the deepest. The escalation was slow, methodical. The tapping evolved. One night, it was a slow drag, like something heavy being pulled across for CS floor. The next, it was a faint, muffled scratching, like claws on wood. I called the police for a wellness check on the empty apartment. They found nothing. The door was locked, the windows sealed, dust thick on the floors. No signs of entry. The officer gave me a polite, pitying look. It's an old building, Mom. Lots of noises. The false safety came after a weekend visit from my sister. Her loud laughter, the clutter of our takeout containers, the blaring TV all seemed to push the building's presence back. For 2 days, it was just a quirky, run-down apartment. When she left on Sunday evening, she hugged me and said, "It's a bit of a creepy old place, Ava, but it has character." I laughed, truly believing the spell was broken. The silence that night was deep and complete. I slept soundly for the first time in weeks. I woke at 2:17 a.m. to the sound of my own name. It was a whisper, so close it seemed to originate inside my own ear. Ava. It was a dry, papery sound, devoid of breath. I froze, my blood turning to ice. The room was pitch black, the streetlight outside my window dead. Then the smell hit overpowering wet clay and ozone, and underneath it, the coppery scent of blood. Tap, tap, tap. This time, it wasn't on the wall. It was on my bedroom door, from the inside of my apartment. I couldn't breathe. I fumbled for my phone, the blinding light from its screen a tiny shield against the suffocating dark. The tapping stopped. I heard a new sound, a soft, wet shuffling in the hallway just outside my door. Then a faint, melodic humming. A nursery rhyme I didn't recognize, tuneless and off-key. It moved past my door, and faded towards the living room. This was it. This was the confrontation my mind had been screaming about for weeks. It was inside my home. The primal part of my brain begged me to hide under the covers, to play dead. But a sharper, colder instinct took over. I had to see. I had to know. Silently, I slid out of bed. The floorboards were icy under my bare feet. I crept to my bedroom door, pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. I turned the knob, the click deafening in the hush, and opened it a crack. The living room was bathed in the sickly green glow of the microwave clock. Everything was in its place: the couch, the coffee table, my books. But the air was thick, charged, and freezing cold. My eyes adjusted, and then I saw it. A figure stood in front of the large window, silhouetted against the faint city glow. It was the shape of a person, but wrong. Its limbs seemed too long, its head tilted at an impossible angle. It wasn't looking out the window. It was perfectly still, facing into my apartment, facing me. I didn't move. It didn't move. We stood in that silent standoff for an eternity, the only sound the frantic drumming of my heart. Then, with a jerky, unnatural motion, like a marionette with tangled strings, its head slowly rotated towards me. There were no features, just a dark, smooth oval where a face should be. It raised one of its elongated arms. It wasn't pointing at me. It was pointing at the wall beside the window, at the blank wall. As I watched, lines began to form on the plaster, glowing with a faint, phosphorescent green light. They sketched themselves rapidly, as if drawn by an invisible hand. They formed a perfect, detailed floor plan of the Crestwood Arms. But it was wrong, just like the child's drawing. It showed extra floors, sub-basements that didn't exist, and rooms within rooms. My apartment, 4B, was a nexus, a junction box in a labyrinth, and from it, thin, glowing lines branched out, connecting to every other apartment, to the non-existent floors below, and converging on a single point in the building's core, apartment 1A, the superintendent's unit. The figure's arm dropped. It took a step towards me, its movement a liquid, boneless flow. A low, vibrating hum filled the room, resonating in my teeth and bones. It wasn't a sound of malice, but of hunger. A vast, ancient, hollow hunger. This thing wasn't a ghost. It was the building, and the building was awake. I ran, not out the front door, past it in the living room, but back into my bedroom, to the window. I wrestled the rusted latch open, the cold night air blasting in. I climbed out onto the narrow fire escape, the metal shrieking in protest. I didn't look back. I clattered down 4 flights, my feet burning on the icy rungs, and sprinted barefoot down the alley until I collapsed on a main street, sobbing. I never went back. I left everything: me clothes, my furniture, my security deposit. I moved across the country. I told people it was a mold problem, a bad breakup, anything but the truth. But sometimes, when I am in a new place, trying to sleep, I'll hear a familiar, distant tap. or ill catch a whiff of wet clay on a dry day, and ill remember the final thing I saw as I fled out that window. I glanced back just once. The figure was no longer at the window. It was standing right where I had been standing in my bedroom doorway. And it wasn't facing the living room anymore. It was facing my empty bed, its head cocked, as if listening for a heartbeat that was no longer there. I know it's still listening. Buildings are patient. They can always wait for a new tenant. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill down your spine, you're not alone. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. It really helps the channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new tale from the dark. And tell me in the comments what's the weirdest thing you've ever found in your home. Story 3. The night I inherited my grandmother's cabin. I know what you're thinking, a free cabin in the woods, a fresh start, who could say no? But I am telling you now, if you ever inherit a property from a relative you barely knew, a relative the rest of the family refuses to even name, you burn the deed. My name is Ava. 2 months ago, I was a graphic designer drowning in city noise, rent, and the gray, grinding sameness of it all. Then the letter came from a law firm in a town I'd never heard of. My maternal grandmother, Alara, had passed and left me her sole asset, a cabin deep in the Blackroot Pines. My mother, when I called, her voice went flat and cold. Don't go there, Ava. Sign it away. Let it rot. She wouldn't say why. That, of course, made me want to go. It felt like a mystery, an adventure, my own personal blank slate. The drive was an 8-hour lesson in diminishing returns. The highway shrunk to a road, the road to a gravel track, the track to a muddy path barely visible under the encroaching pines. The cabin, when I finally found it, wasn't the quaint cottage I'd pictured. It was a sturdy, dark-timbered box with a steeply pitched roof, hunched against a wall of forest so dense it seemed to swallow the afternoon light. The key was under a mossy rock, exactly as the lawyer said. The first thing that hit me was the smell, not damp, rot, or mildew, but a dry, sweet scent like old parchment and dried lavender. It was clean, oddly so. No dust sheets, no mouse droppings. It looked maintained. The second thing was the silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was a thick, watchful quiet, like the forest was holding its breath. The third was the windows. Every single one of them had a deep, recessed window seat, piled with faded cushions, as if someone spent a great deal of time sitting there, looking out. I settled in. The place was fully stocked with non-perishables. The plumbing worked, and there was a generator out back. I told myself the unease was just city girl nerves. I spent the first day cleaning what was already clean, trying to make my mark. That night, the sounds began. Not the standard groans and settles of an old house. These were deliberate. A soft, rhythmic scratch, scratch, scratch at the front door, like like a dog wanting in. When I shone my flashlight through the peephole, nothing was there. The scratching just moved to the side window. Then, around 3 a.m., a sound from the kitchen. The clear, distinct clink of a porcelain teacup being placed on a saucer. I froze in bed, my heart a frantic bird against my ribs. Id unpacked my own mug, a chunky travel one. The china in the cabinet was untouched. The next morning, in the harsh, cheerless daylight, it all felt silly. An animal, probably. The house settling. I decided a walk would clear my head. The forest was a cathedral of gloomy green light. And that's when I found them. Dozens of them. Stones, not natural ones. Smooth, river-worn stones, each about the size of a fist, placed in deliberate patterns on the forest floor. Circles, spirals, intricate lines that vanished into the undergrowth. They felt ancient and purposeful. I touched one, and a jolt of static electricity made me snatch my hand back. As I hurried back, I had the unmistakable feeling of being paced, just out of sight among the trees. Let me ask you guys something, because I've thought about it a lot since. What's your breaking point? What's the one weird detail that shifts a creepy situation into a full-blown I need to leave now scenario? Is it a sound, a smell? For me, it was the photographs. I found them in a locked trunk in the bedroom closet. The key was on a nail behind the door. The trunk was full of my grandmother's things. Journals, pressed flowers, and albums. The photos span decades. In every single one, from her as a young woman to an elderly lady, she was never alone. There was always a figure in the background, just out of focus. Standing at the edge of the woods in one, a blurred shape in the window reflection in another, a dark smudge behind her in a third. In the most recent photo, she looked pale and tired, sitting in her window seat, and the figure was inside the cabin, a tall, indistinct shadow cast on the wall behind her. The caption in her spidery script read, "My companion." The bargain holds. That was my breaking point. Bargain, companion. I didn't want to know. I packed a single bag. I'd drive to the nearest motel and call the lawyer in the morning to sell. The generator had been acting up, so the lights were flickering as I rushed around. I just had to get to my car. I threw open the front door, and the forest was gone. Not gone, but changed. A thick, impenetrable white fog had rolled in, coiling around the porch posts, swallowing the path, the trees, everything beyond 5 feet. It was silent and cold. My car was a vague, ghostly shape. This wasn't natural fog. It felt like a wall, a presence. I took a step, and the fog retreated just ahead of me, but closed in tightly behind, as if hurting me. I could only see the next step. My heart hammered against my throat. I inched forward, following the faint outline of my car's bumper. A hand closed over my mouth from behind. An arm, thin and strong as a root, wrapped around my chest. I was dragged backwards, not roughly, but with an inexorable force. My heels dug uselessly into the soft earth. The fog swirled, and I was pulled back across the threshold. The door slammed shut. I was released. I spun, gasping, to face an empty room. The fire in the hearth, which I hadn't lit, blazed with a blue-tinged flame. A voice, not in my ears, but in the very grain of the wood around me, vibrated through the cabin. The air is home. The watch begins. I spent the next week in a state of slow, unraveling terror. The doors wouldn't open for me. The windows, when I tried to break one with a fireplace poker, seemed to swallow the impact, the glass wavering like water before settling back, unblemished. The fog remained a solid white prison outside. The food in the pantry never ran out. The fire never needed new logs. The cabin was providing. It was also teaching. The scratching at night became a tapping. The tapping became a pattern, a code. I'd wake to find things, move at a journal open to a specific page about local flora. A specific stone from the forest patterns placed on my pillow. The blurry figure from the photos began to manifest. Not all at once. A shadow in the corner of my eye that didn't match the furniture. Chill spot that followed me from room to room. The scent of parchment and lavender would intensify, and a deep, resonant hum would fill the air, a sound that vibrated in my bones. I learned from the journals. My grandmother, Alara, had made a pact. The cabin, the land, it was all protected by something old, a warden of the woods. In exchange for its protection from outsiders, from disease, from the ravages of time a member of the bloodline must always be in residence, to watch, to keep the old ways, to be the anchor. The companion was the previous warden, bound to the place until a new heir took the watch. Her loneliness in the photos wasn't because she was alone. It was because of what was with her. The climax wasn't a jump scare. It was a conversation. I finally broke, screaming into the empty living room. What do you want from me? Let me go. The air before me shimmered, like heat haze off asphalt. The figure coalesced from shadow and dust, motes in a shaft of weak light. It was tall, humanoid, but not human. Its form seemingly woven from bark, shadow, and the memory of a man. Its eyes were like chips of obsidian, reflecting the blue fire. Its voice was the creak of pines in a storm, the crackle of hearth fire, the whisper of turning pages. You are the heir. The watch is yours. Alara's watch is ended. Mine is ended. You are the anchor now. You keep the balance. You keep the fog at bay. It gestured a long, twig-like finger toward the window. For the first time in days, the fog parted slightly. I saw what lay beyond the protective barrier. Shapes moved in the deeper woods. Pale, twisted things with too many limbs, drawn to the warmth of a soul, but repelled by the cabin's ward. The warden had been keeping them out. The fog wasn't to keep me in. It was to keep everything else out. The bargain was protection in both directions. I understood then. My mother knew. She ran, had me in the city, tried to break the line. But the legacy found me. The warden, the previous, bound spirit was waiting for its replacement. For me, the moment of false safety came when the figure bowed its head and began to fade. The transfer is complete. The watch is yours. I am unbound. A wave of profound, aching loneliness washed over me, followed by a surge of terrifying power. I could feel the cabin's walls like an extension of my own skin. I could feel the roots beneath the floor, the perimeter of the fog. I could feel the hungry things pressing against it, and I knew how to hold it. The knowledge was just there, implanted. The fog outside thinned. The path to my car was clear, the doors unlocked with a thought. I could leave right then. I could run to my car and never look back. But the knowledge also told me what would happen. The wards would fall. The fog would vanish. And the things in the woods, the old, hungry things my grandmother and her companion had held at bay for a lifetime, would not just take the cabin. They would follow the bloodline. They would find my mother. In the city, in her bright, safe apartment. They would find her and they would feed. I stood at the open door, the keys to my car in my hand. I looked back at the empty, waiting cabin, at the window seat with its view of the imprisoning, protecting woods. I felt the weight of the watch settle into my soul, a cold, permanent lodestone. I closed the door. I locked it from the inside. I walked to the window seat and sat down, pulling a cushion onto my lap. I looked out at the gathering twilight, at the fog I now commanded, at the shapes that slithered at the edge of perception. The final, chilling truth settled over me, not as a fear, but as a fact. I am the air, I am the anchor. And from this quiet, clean cabin in the deep, dark woods, I will watch forever. So that's my story. I don't know why I am recording this and uploading it. Maybe it's a warning. Maybe it's a cry into the void. Maybe it's just part of the watch to tell the tale so it isn't forgotten. If you ever get a letter about an inheritance from a relative no one talks about, remember my voice. Burn the deed. Thank you for listening. If you felt that chill, that sense of dread, you understand. Please, if you enjoyed this journey into the dark, give this video a like. It helps more than you know. Subscribe for more tales of the unexplained and the terrifying. And in the comments, tell me, would you have run knowing what would follow? Or would you have sat in the window seat and taken up the watch? Stay curious, but stay safe. Until next time. Story 4. The backyard my grandparents never used. I should have realized the truth when I saw the lock was on the wrong side of the garden gate. My name is Lee, and 3 months ago, I inherited my grandparents' house of sprawling, old Victorian, on a half-acre lot at the edge of a town that had forgotten how to be quiet. The move was supposed to be a fresh start after a bad breakup and a layoff, a chance to fix up a beautiful, if slightly neglected, property, and maybe find some peace. The house was exactly as I remembered from childhood summers. Floral wallpaper that had faded into ghosts of roses, the persistent smell of lemon polish and attic dust, and the grandfather clock in the hall that ticked just a little too loudly, like a slow, metallic heartbeat. But the backyard was always the star in my memory a wild. sun-drenched paradise of overgrown rose bushes and a massive, ancient oak tree. Except, I now realized, I had no memory of ever actually playing in it. I'd only ever viewed it from the kitchen window. The first oddity was the gate. It was a tall, wrought-iron thing set into a 7-foot stone wall that encircled the entire garden. Beautiful, but imposing. When I went to unlock it on my first full day, the heavy padlock and chain were threaded through the hasp on the inside. That struck me as strange. Why lock a garden from the inside? Who were they trying to keep in? I shrugged it off as an eccentricity of my grandfather, a notoriously private man, and fetched the bolt cutters from the garage. The garden itself was breathtakingly overgrown. Vines strangled the gazebo, thistles grew as high as my waist, and the oak tree stood like a gnarled king, overlooking its neglected domain. It was silent, too. Not just quiet, but a thick, muffled silence that seemed to swallow the distant sounds of neighborhood lawnmowers and cars. The air was still and heavy, smelling of damp earth and decaying petals. As I explored, my boot caught on something in the tall grass. It was a small, hand-painted ceramic tile, mostly green, but with a single, crude white eye glazed onto its surface. Weird garden art, I thought, and tossed it aside. I found 2 more that afternoon, each with a different symbol, a series of interlocked rings, and a wavy line that looked like a river. That first week was a blur of unpacking and painting, but the noises started soon after. Not at night, but in the dead of afternoon. It was a scraping sound, like something heavy being dragged across the flagstone path in the garden. Every time I'd look out, there'd be nothing there, just the swaying of untamed grass. Then came the whispers. Faint, hissing threads of sound that seemed to come from just outside the living room window. Sentences I could never quite grasp. I told myself it was the wind through the ivy, or the pipes groaning. But the house had no ivy on that wall, and the whispers didn't sound like pipes. You know that feeling when you're home alone, and you suddenly feel, with absolute certainty, that you are not alone. It's a primal chill that starts at the base of your spine. I started feeling it constantly. I'd be reading, and the hair on my arms would stand up. I'd turn around, and the hallway would be empty, but the air would feel watched. I began keeping all the curtains drawn, especially the ones facing the garden. But that made it worse, because then the only thing I could imagine was what might be right on the other side of the fabric, inches from me, listening back. Okay, let me pause for a second and ask you guys something, because I am genuinely curious. What's your proof? You know, that one little piece of evidence your rational mind latches onto to explain away the creepy stuff. For me, for a long time, it was the neighborhood cats. I convinced myself a tomcat was making the scraping sounds, hunting in the tall grass. The whispers were a radio from a nearby house. It's amazing what well believed to feel safe. My proof shattered on a Tuesday. Id mustered the courage to tackle the garden again, armed with shears and determination. The afternoon sun was bright, bleaching the color out of everything. As I cleared weeds near the base of the old oak, my shears hit something hard. I dug with my hands, pulling away damp soil and roots, and uncovered a flat, rectangular stone. It wasn't natural. It was a lid, with a rusted iron ring set into it. A trapdoor. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the source of the weirdness. Some old root cellar, probably full of jars of my grandmother's preserves, and nothing else. I'd open it, see a dark, empty hole, and finally laugh at my own fear. I hooked my fingers through the ring, braced my feet, and pulled. The stone slab pivoted up with a groan, releasing a breath of air so cold it made me gasp. It smelled of wet stone, old metal, and something else, something sweetly rotten, like forgotten fruit. I pulled out my phone, turned on the flashlight, and pointed it down. The light didn't reach the bottom. It was a square shaft, lined with perfectly fitted stones, descending into absolute blackness. And the walls of the shaft, they were covered in tiles. Hundreds of them, from top as far as my light could shine, each hand-painted with those same strange symbols. Eyes, rings, waves, spirals, jagged lines. They formed no pattern I could understand, but looking at them made my head ache and my eyes water, as if my brain was trying to parse a language it wasn't built to read. I slammed the lid shut. The thud echoed in the silent garden. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with every light on, a knife on the table, staring at the back door. The house was quieter than it had ever been. No ticking from the grandfather clock. No creaks or groans. Just a waiting silence. By 4 a.m., exhaustion pulled at me. The fear had burned itself out, leaving a numb, hollow feeling. See, I thought, my mind sluggish. Nothing happened. You opened a weird old well. Big deal. It's just a hole in the ground. The relief was so profound, it felt like intoxication. I turned off the lights and trudged upstairs to bed, falling into a deep, dreamless sleep almost the moment my head hit the pillow. I was awakened by the sound of my own name. Lee. It was a dry, rasping voice right beside my ear. The smell of damp earth and decay filled the room. My eyes flew open. The room was dark, but the streetlight outside cast a faint glow through the window. I was on my side, facing the wall. I could feel the weight of another presence on the bed behind me, the mattress dipping down. I could hear a soft, rhythmic scraping sound, like fingers with long nails gently dragging across my bedsheet. Don't move. Don't breathe. The thought was a scream trapped in my frozen mind. Every muscle was locked in pure terror. I stared at the wall in front of my face, my eyes wide and unblinking. Then, in the periphery of my vision, I saw it. A hand, slowly coming into view as the thing behind me leaned over. It wasn't a human hand. It was made of gnarled, dark wood and tangled, root-like fingers, clumped with cold, wet soil. It was studded with those painted ceramic tiles, spirals, jagged lines embedded into its flesh-like bark. It reached past my face, its fingers tracing the air just inches from my cheek, and planted itself flat against the wall. And it began to pull. Not me, the wall, or rather, the reality of the wall. The plaster beneath its wooden palm darkened, cracked, and began to crumble away, not into dust, but into a void of that same impossible blackness from the shaft in the garden. A cold wind, carrying the scent of deep, ancient earth, blew from the expanding hole. The whispers returned, not from outside now, but from the void itself, a chorus of hissing, eager voices. The thing was making a doorway. It was pulling the garden, or what lived in the garden, into my room. That's when I broke. A raw, animal sound tore from my throat, and I scrambled out of bed, falling to the floor. I looked back. The thing on my bed was a hunched, shadowy mass, more a sculpture of roots and clay and tiles than a creature. It had no face, just a cluster of tile-eyes that all swiveled to focus on me. It didn't move from the bed. It just kept its hand pressed to the now basketball-sized hole of whispering darkness in my wall. And its other, root-like arm pointed at me. One long, dirt-caked finger extending in a slow, unmistakable gesture. Come here. I ran. I fell down the stairs, wrenched open the front door, and sprinted barefoot into the night in my pajamas. I didn't stop until I was pounding on my neighbor's door, sobbing and bleeding from my torn feet. I never went back. I sold the house as is to a developer for a fraction of its value. I told them about the faulty plumbing, the old wiring, the crumbling garden wall. I didn't mention the shaft. I didn't mention the tiles. I signed the papers in a lawyer's office 50 miles away, my hands shaking. I heard through the town gossip that the developers cleared the garden first. They brought in an excavator to tear out the old tree and fill in the unpermitted well. The foreman quit the first day. The crew reported constant equipment failures, tools going missing, and a feeling of being watched that was so intense 2 men refused to go back on site. The project was abandoned. The house sits empty now, windows boarded, the garden growing wilder than ever. I live in a small, modern apartment on the 3rd floor of a busy building. There are no gardens, no grandfather clocks, no spare rooms. I keep the TV on for noise, but sometimes, late at night, when the city is quiet, I'll hear a faint, familiar sound, a soft, dry scraping, like roots or fingers moving slowly across the ceiling of the apartment below me. And I'll lie very still, staring at my own blank, white wall, praying I never see a single hand-painted tile appear in the plaster. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill down your spine, you're not alone. Please give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a story that might just keep you up tonight? Let me know in the comments what you would have done if you found that trapdoor in your garden. Would you have looked? Story 5. The cabin that wanted me to stay. I wasn't supposed to be in the family cabin alone, but after the will reading, I felt I had no other choice. My name is Rachel, and my grandmother's final request was simple. Spend 1 week at the old A-frame in the Washington woods to secure my inheritance. A simple test of resolve, the lawyer said. A chance to say goodbye. But some goodbyes are more permanent than others. The drive up was beautiful. All fiery autumn leaves and crisp mountain air. The cabin itself, nestled in a dense pine grove at the end of a 2-mile dirt road, was exactly as I remembered from childhood summers. Cozy, if a little worn. The heavy brass key turned with a satisfying clunk. Inside smelled of pine sap, wood smoke, and that peculiar, sweet dusty scent of old books and older curtains. I unpacked my groceries, built a fire in the stone hearth, and poured a glass of wine, feeling a smug sense of accomplishment. The silence was profound, a thick blanket after the constant hum of the city. It was peaceful, until I noticed the first detail that was off. All the family photos on the mantel were turned face down. A prank by my cousins, I assumed, bitter about the will. I righted them, smiling at my grandmother's youthful face. The second detail was the collection of smooth, river-worn stones arranged in a perfect spiral on the coffee table. Quirky decor, I thought. Grandma always was a little eccentric. The third detail I only noticed as I got ready for bed. The windows, old and warped, didn't just reflect the firelight. In the black glass, for a fraction of a second, the reflections seemed delayed, moving a heartbeat after I did. The first night, I chalked the noises up to an old house settling. The groan of timber, the pop of cooling logs in the fireplace. But around 3 a.m., a new sound emerged, a soft, rhythmic scratching, like a dog wanting to be let in, coming from the inside of the front door. My blood went cold. I lay paralyzed, listening. It stopped as suddenly as it began. In the morning, I examined the door. Deep, fresh gouges scored the interior wood at about waist height. No animal could have done that from the inside. The days took on a strange rhythm. The woods were too quiet. No bird song, no chattering squirrels. The silence felt intentional, watchful. I'd go for walks and find my footprints from the previous day erased. The forest floor behind me pristine, as if it never passed. I started talking to myself, just to break the quiet. My phone had no signal, and the landline emitted only a low, guttural static. The isolation was becoming a physical weight. Speaking of isolation, what's the most isolated you've ever felt? Was it a place or a feeling that followed you? Let me know in the comments, because by day 3, I was starting to understand true solitude. The oddities escalated. I'd leave a book open on the armchair and find it closed, a different river stone placed as a bookmark. The fire Id banked for the night would be roaring when I came downstairs. The stones on the table rearranged into angular, rune-like shapes. One afternoon, I found a single, muddy footprint on the hearthrug. It was small, a child's size, but the mud was cold and wet, and it hadn't rained in days. The worst was the whispering. It wasn't in the air, but in the walls. A faint, susurrating murmur like many voices talking at once, just below the threshold of understanding. If I pressed my ear to the cedar paneling, I could almost make out words. My name, always my name, Rachel Stay. I became obsessed with my grandmother's journals, which I found in a trunk. The later entries were frantic, fragmented. The woods are hungry. It mirrors us to keep us. The stones are anchors. Do not move them. The final entry, dated the week before she died, was a single, trembling sentence. It has my face now. On the 5th night, I broke. I decided to leave. Inheritance be damned. I threw my things into my suitcase. As I passed the coffee table, I kicked the spiral of stones in frustration. They clattered across the floorboards. The effect was instantaneous. The whispering in the walls became a deafening roar. Every light bulb in the cabin blew out in a shower of glass. The fire died to embers, and in the sudden, profound dark, I saw them. Reflections in every window, in the blank TV screen, in the glass of the framed pictures. Dozens of reflections of me, but wrong. Their expressions were of serene, empty bliss, and they weren't moving with me. They were just standing, staring out from their panes of glass, smiling. I ran. I fumbled for the front door, yanked it open, and sprinted into the moonless night. The dirt road was a pitch-black tunnel. I ran until my lungs burned, the suitcase long abandoned. I saw the glow of my car's parking lights ahead. Salvation. I sobbed with relief, fumbling for the keys in my pocket. I hit the unlock button. The lights flashed. I grabbed the door handle. It was locked. I tried again. Nothing. I peered inside. The keys were in the ignition, where I never, ever leave them, and sitting in the driver's seat, staring straight ahead with that same vacant, blissful smile, was my own reflection from the cabin windows. It slowly turned its head and looked at me. I stumbled backwards, falling onto the cold ground. I couldn't go back. I had to get to the main road. I turned and ran back up the path toward the cabin, planning to veer into the woods and just run. But the cabin wasn't where I left it. The path ended not at the A-frame, but at a clearing. The center stood a figure, silhouetted against the starlight. It was my grandmother, or something wearing her skin. It turned, and its face was a shifting, liquid mask of every family member I'd ever known, finally settling on my own features, but aged and weathered. It opened its mouth, and the sound of the whispering walls poured out, now a clear, resonant command. Stay. I woke up at dawn, shivering on the hearthrug inside the cabin. The fire was crackling merrily. The smell of coffee filled the air. Sunlight streamed through the windows. My suitcase was by the door, unpacked. The stones were back on the table, in a neat spiral. A profound, unnatural peace settled over me. The fear was gone, replaced by a deep, unquestioning contentment. This was my home. It always had been. I had been so silly to want to leave. I made breakfast, humming. I righted the family photos on the mantel, which had somehow been turned face down again. I smiled at my grandmother's picture. She looked so happy here. We all do. I am writing this in her journal, in the blank pages at the back. The pen moves so smoothly. The words come easily. I can hear the gentle whisper in the walls, a soothing lullaby now. It's showing me such wonderful things in the reflections. A future here forever. The lawyer will come to check on me soon, to see if I fulfilled the week. He'll find the cabin empty, my car still here, keys in the ignition. He'll report me missing. Another tragic mystery in the deep woods. He's wrong, of course. I'm not missing. I'm right where I belong. And if you ever find yourself in a place that feels a little too welcoming, a little too eager to make you comfortable, remember my story. Check your reflections closely. And whatever you do, don't move the stones, because it's so much easier to just stay. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill down your spine, you're my kind of people. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. It really helps the channel. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a tale from the dark. And tell me in the comment shave, you ever felt a presence in an old house or seen something in a reflection that shouldn't be there? I read every single one. Until next time, sleep well. Story 6. The House That Knew Our Secrets. I am never going back to my childhood home, and y'all understand why by the end of this. My name is Ava, and 2 months ago, my mother passed away. It wasn't unexpected, a long illness, but the grief was a hollow, quiet thing, more like a missing limb than a sharp pain. The practicalities took over. The will, the funeral, the emptying of a life into boxes. The house, a sprawling, slightly shabby Victorian on a tree-lined street in a town Id fled a decade prior, was left solely to me. My brother Marcus wanted nothing to do with it. Sell it, burn it. I don't care, he said over the phone, his voice tight. Just get it over with. So I went back, armed with black trash bags, cardboard boxes, and a steely resolve to be clinical about it. The first day was just sad. The air inside was still and smelled of lemon polish, dust, and the faint, medicinal ghost of my mother's illness. Sunlight streamed through the lace curtains in the parlor, illuminating motes of dust, dancing over the familiar floral sofa. Everything was exactly as I remembered, yet completely alien. I started in the attic, figuring the sentimental landmines were in the living spaces. The attic was just junk. Old yearbooks, my father's forgotten fishing gear, boxes of Christmas decorations. But as I worked, I kept feeling watched. Not a malevolent stare, just a persistent, gentle pressure between my shoulder blades. It'd turn and see nothing, but at shadows pooling in the corners, deeper than they should have been in the midday sun. I chalked it up to grief and the strangeness of being alone in the silent, memory-soaked house. The first real oddity was the whispering. It started that evening as I was sorting through my old bedroom. It was barely audible, a sibilant rush like distant radio static or leaves skittering across pavement. It'd pause, my hands full of childhood's stuffed animals, and hold my breath. It would stop. The moment I resumed moving, it would start again, just at the edge of hearing. It felt like the house itself was sighing. I told myself it was the old pipes. The wind in the Ivesthas house had always been full of noises. But these whispers had a rhythm, a cadence that almost sounded like words. Almost. Here's a question for you guys, because I am genuinely curious now, looking back. What's the weirdest, most inexplicable sound you've ever heard in your own home? Something you just couldn't logic away. Let me know in the comments. The next day, the whispers gained a focus. I was in the kitchen, packing up my mother's china, when I heard it clearly from the dining room. Not words, but my name, Ava, a soft, breathy exhalation. My blood went cold. I stood frozen, a plate in my hand. Marcus. I called out, though I knew he wasn't there. Silence. I forced a laugh, a brittle, unconvincing sound. Okay, Ava, you're officially losing it. But the atmosphere had shifted. The sunlit sadness of the previous day was gone, replaced by a dense, watchful quiet. The air felt thicker, harder to breathe. That night, I decided to stay over. The idea of driving back to my sterile hotel room felt like cowardice. This was my house now. I needed to reclaim it. I slept in my old room, the whispering a constant, soft backdrop that eventually lulled me into a fitful sleep. I dreamed of the house, but it was wrong. The walls pulsed gently, like a living membrane, and in the dream, I knew every secret it held. I woke with a jolt at 3:07 a.m. The whispering had stopped. The silence was absolute, a physical weight on my chest. And then I smelled it, my father's pipe tobacco. He'd died when I was 12, and he'd smoked a very distinctive, sweet cherry blend. The scent was overwhelming, filling the room. I sat up, my heart hammering against my ribs. Dad, I whispered into the darkness, a child's hope flaring for a second. The scent vanished, replaced by the coppery, metallic smell of blood. I gagged, scrambling for the lamp. The light revealed nothing but my familiar room. But the smell of blood lingered for a full minute before fading away. The following days were a slow unraveling. Objects began to move. My father's old reading glasses appeared on my pillow. A photo of Marcus and me as children, one id packed away, was found leaning against the bathroom mirror. The whispers became more insistent, and sometimes, in the periphery of my vision, I'd see a shadow detach itself from the others and linger for a half second too long. The house wasn't haunted by a ghost. It felt like the house was the ghost, and it was trying to communicate. It was pulling memories from the walls and playing them back for me, but not happy memories. It showed me the night of my parents' huge fight before my dad left for the last timeth slammed door, my mother's sobs. It replayed the tense, hushed argument Marcus and I had in the kitchen after Mom's diagnosis, where I accused him of abandoning her, and he called me a self-righteous martyr. The climax came on the final day. I was in the basement, a place I'd been avoiding. It was cold, damp, and smelled of earth and old concrete. I was there to check the circuit breaker, as the lights had begun flickering erratically throughout the house. As I shone my phone's flashlight around, the beam caught something on the far wall, behind the ancient water heater. It wasn't stone. It was wood, a small, crude door, barely 3 feet high, latched with a heavy iron bolt. A cold dread seeped into my bones. I had never seen this door in my life. My parents had never mentioned it. The whispers in that moment became a chorus, a frantic, overlapping susurrus that filled the dank air. I could almost make out words. Dauncey Hidebed with trembling hands. I slid the iron bolt back. It opened with a groan of protest. The space beyond was a shallow crawl space, not a room. And in it was a small, rotting cardboard box. Inside the box were things. A locket that belonged to my grandmother, who disappeared when my mother was a child. A man's class ring I didn't recognize. A child's hair ribbon brittle with age. And a stack of yellowed newspapers, the headlines screaming about local missing persons spanning 50 years. At the very bottom was a single, folded piece of paper in my mother's elegant handwriting. It was a list, names, dates, and beside each one, a single word, quiet, safe, contained. The house didn't have a ghost. It was a vault. My family weren't victims of the dark. They were its custodians. This house, this beautiful, terrible home, was where they brought the problems, the scandals, the embarrassments that couldn't be allowed to exist in the light of day. And it held them. It absorbed them. It remembered them. The whispers were the echoes of all the secrets it had ever swallowed. The smells, the moving objects, were the house rifling through its collection, showing me my inheritance. I stumbled out of the basement, out of the house, and never went back. I called a company that deals in hazardous materials and gave them the keys. Let them bulldoze it for all I care. I sold the land for a fraction of its value. Marcus thinks I am crazy. Maybe I am. But last night, in my new apartment, hundreds of miles away, I woke up at 3:07 a.m. The air was still, and I smelled, just for a second, the faint, sweet scent of cherry pipe tobacco. It seems some secrets don't like to be left behind. Thanks for listening to my story. If you felt that chill down your spine, you know the kind of fear I am talking about. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. It really helps the channel. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the unexplained. And tell me in the comments, would you have opened that door? Story 7. The night we opened the wrong package. I'm writing this from a place where the light never quite reaches the corners. And I have to tell you about the night a delivery box shattered our reality. My name is Ava, and this isn't a story about a haunted house. It's about a haunted idea, one that slithered into our lives through the mail slot of our old apartment building. The building itself was a character grand Art Deco relic with crown moldings that swallowed whispers and floorboards that sang a chorus of other people's lives. We loved it for its history, its high ceilings, and its thick walls. At least, we did until we learned what those walls were really keeping in. It started on a Tuesday. Id just finished a long shift at the clinic, my fingers still smelling of antiseptic, and was wrestling with my keys in the dimly lit hallway. Our neighbor, Mr. Brenner, was shuffling out of his apartment across the hall. He was a reclusive man in his 80s, a former librarian with kind, watery eyes that always seemed focused on something just over your shoulder. "Package for you, Ava," he croaked, nodding toward our door. "Big one. Came while you were out." He paused, his hand trembling on his cane. Wrong name on it, though. Strange name. I didn't touch it. He hurried away before I could thank him, his slippers whispering on the worn carpet. It was the first subtle detail. Mr. Brenner, who usually loved to chat about the weather, fleeing from a cardboard box. The box sat squarely on our welcome mat. It was about the size of a small suitcase, wrapped in plain brown paper that was oddly pristine, without a single shipping label, barcode, or stamp. Just our apartment number, 4B, handwritten in a precise, spidery script, and beneath it the addressee, the listeners. Not my name, not my fiancé Marcus. Just the listeners. I shrugged it off, assuming it was a misdelivered art project from one of Marcus' graphic designer friends. He was out of town for a work conference, and the silence of the apartment felt heavier than usual as I dragged the box inside. It was lighter than it looked, unsettlingly so, as if it were full of feathers or ash. For 2 days, the box sat in our entryway. I'd walk past it and feel a faint, irrational chill, like a draft from a sealed window. I'd catch myself staring at that handwritten the listeners, and my mind would snag on Mr. Brenner's hurried retreat. On the third night, with Marcus due home the next day, my curiosity got the better of me. The rational part of my brain, the nurse who dealt in blood pressure and bandages, scoffed. It was just a box. I got a kitchen knife and sliced through the paper. Inside was another box, this one made of a dark, unfinished wood, smooth and cool to the touch. It smelled faintly of ozone and damp soil, a scent that seemed to push the air out of the room. There was no latch, no hinge, just 6 intricately carved panels. As I ran my fingers over the carving strange, interlocking patterns that looked less like decoration and more like a schematic or a cage, I heard the first sound. A soft, rhythmic tap, tap, tap from inside the wooden box. Not a frantic knocking, but patient, deliberate, like a fingernail testing the thickness of a wall. I jerked my hand back, my heart hammering. The tapping stopped instantly. Okay, viewers, I have to ask, what's the one rule you've been told never to break? For me, it was always don't open strange packages. But curiosity is a powerful thing, isn't it? What would you have done? Let me know in the comments. I told myself it was an elaborate, terribly tasteless prank. Maybe a speaker, a battery-powered thing. I carried the wooden box to the kitchen table, under the bright pendant light, as if the illumination could explain it. The tapping didn't return. Instead, I began to hear the whispers, not from the box, from the apartment itself. At first, they were just at the edge of hearing, blending with the hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic. But soon, they resolved into fragments of sentences, spoken in voices that were chillingly familiar, yet utterly wrong. I heard my mother's voice, but she was saying words Shed never use. I heard Marcus whispering a plea from a room away, but he was hundreds of miles distant. The whispers weren't threatening, they were mournful, confused, like lost transmissions. I called Marcus, my voice shaking. Did you send me some weird art box? A wooden one? What? No. Ava, you sound terrible. Are you okay? There's something in this box. I hear things. Open it, he said, pragmatic as ever. If it's a prank, y'all see. If it's something nasty, well, deal with it. Just film it. His logic was a lifeline. I propped my phone up, hit record, and with trembling hands, searched the wooden box for a seam. As I pressed on one of the carved symbols, there was a soft click, and the top panel slid back silently. The inside was lined with faded black velvet. Nestled in the center was an object that made my breath catch. It was a figurine, about 8 inches tall, carved from a bone-white material. It was humanoid, but painfully contorted, its limbs bent at impossible angles, its featureless face turned upward in a silent scream. And clutched in its twisted hands was a small obsidian mirror, no bigger than a postage stamp. The moment the light hit the figurine, the whispers in the apartment stopped. A profound, deafening silence fell. It was worse than the noise. This was a listening silence. I reached out, not to touch the grotesque figure, but the little mirror. My fingertip brushed its cold, glassy surface. The apartment exploded with sound. Not whispers this time. A cacophony of overlapping voices, cries, arguments, laughter a century of the building's hidden life blasted into the present. I screamed and slammed the wooden lid shut. The noise cut off. My phone had toppled over, stopping the recording. I was alone, panting, my ears ringing in the new quiet. For a long time, I just sat there. Then, with a resolve born of sheer terror, I took the wooden box, carried it down to the building's garbage room in the basement, and shoved it deep into the overflowing bin. I came back upstairs, locked the deadbolt and chain, and finally slept a fitful, nightmare-ridden sleep. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the windows. The normal sounds of the city returned. I felt a wave of exhausted relief. It was over, a bizarre, traumatic event, but over. I'd thrown the thing away. This was my moment of false safety. Marcus came home that evening. I clung to him, babbling my story. He was concerned, comforting, but I could see the skepticism in his eyes. He made us tea, and as we sat on the couch, he said, "Show me the video." I fetched my phone, opened the gallery, and selected the recording. The timestamp showed it was only 20 seconds long. It showed my hands fumbling with the box, the lid sliding open, a glimpse of the white figurine, then my fingertip approaching the mirror. The screen went black a second before it should have, and from the phone's speaker, clear as day, came a voice that was not mine, not Marco's, but something dry and ancient and horribly close. "We see you, listener." Marcus dropped his mug. It shattered on the floor. We stared at each other in mute horror. That's when we heard the tapping again. Not from the phone, not from the door. It was coming from inside the wall behind our couch. It was patient. Tap, tap, tap. Then a slow, grating scrape, like a nail being dragged down the interior of the plaster. We froze, two statues in our own living room. The scraping traveled laterally, following the path of the wall, heading toward the building's hallway. We heard it move through the junction where our wall met Mr. Brenner's. And then we heard a new sound from across the hall. A thin, high wail of terror that was cut off with a sickening finality. Marcus grabbed a fire poker. I just stood there, numb. The scraping in the walls stopped. The silence returned, thicker than before. We didn't call the police. What would we say? Our wall ate our neighbor. We spent the night huddled together in the bedroom, listening to the building breathe. In the cold blue light of dawn, we heard a new sound. A soft, wet, clicking sound, like a giant insect coming from our air vent. We packed a single bag and fled to a hotel. We reported Mr. Brenner missing anonymously. The police found nothing. No sign of struggle. Just an empty apartment that smelled, one officer mentioned offhandedly, faintly of ozone and damp soil. We broke our lease, citing a family emergency. On our last day, clearing out the final items, I had to go back alone. Marcus waited in the running car downstairs. The apartment was a hollow shell. As I took one final look around, my foot kicked something small and hard that had rolled under the radiator in the entryway. It was the figurine. The bone-white, contorted figurine. It must have fallen out that first night. It had been here the whole time, and it was different. Its posture had changed. No longer a static sculpture of agony, its head was now tilted, as if listening intently. And in its tiny obsidian mirror, I didn't see my own reflection. I saw a dark, shifting shape, and behind it, the faint, screaming outline of a face I recognized from a missing persons poster I'd seen in the lobby years ago, a previous tenant who had vanished. I left it there. I ran. We moved across the country. We changed our numbers. We thought we'd escaped. But last night, as I was taking out the trash at our new, modern, supposedly safe house, I found it on our porch. No box, no paper, just sitting there, gleaming under the motion sensor light. the figurine. Its limbs had rearranged themselves again, now curled in a grotesque parody of a hug. And the little mirror was facing our front door. I didn't touch it. I just backed away inside and locked everything. Marcus thinks I am seeing things, that the stress followed me. He's sleeping soundly right now, but I'm awake, writing this to you, because I can hear a new sound, not from the walls Herethier too new, too dry but from the sleek, modern speaker of our smart home system. A soft digital crackle, and beneath it, the faintest echo of a tap. It's learning. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill, that sense of something watching from just outside the frame of your own life, then you understand. Please, if you enjoyed this tale, give the video a thumbs up. It helps more listeners find their way here. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next descent into the unknown. And in the comments, tell me, what's the strangest package you've ever received? Stay safe out there, and maybe check your front step. Story 8. The highway that erases your past. I never should have tried to remember the man in the passenger seat. It started, like these things always do, with a simple, rational decision. My name is Ava, and I was driving home from a tech conference in the city, a 7-hour slog that stretched into the dead of night. The interstate was a black ribbon under a moonless sky, my headlights carving out a small, lonely tunnel of vision. I was exhausted, the caffeine wearing off, leaving a gritty feeling behind my eyes. That's when I saw the detour signa flickering, old-fashioned board lit by a single yellow bulb. Bridge out. Use alternate Route 9. A groan escaped my lips. Route 9 was a snaking 2-lane road that cut through the dense, ancient woods known as the Black Pine Barrens. My GPS, losing signal, stuttered, and then displayed a blank, gray screen with the cheerful text, "Rerouting so, I turned." The silence was the first change. The low hum of the interstate vanished, replaced by an oppressive quiet broken only by the crunch of my tires on gravel and the whispering rush of pine trees crowding the road. The air coming through the vents cooled noticeably, carrying a scent like wet earth and decaying leaves, a smell that felt older than it should. My phone, which had been playing a podcast, died completely, the battery icon plummeting from 30 to 0 in an instant. I shook it, a pointless gesture, and tossed it onto the passenger seat. That's when I saw the first glitch. In the reflection of the dark window, for a fraction of a second, I thought I saw the shape of someone sitting there. I jerked my head, my heart leaping into my throat. The seat was empty, of course, just my coat and my dead phone. Just fatigue playing tricks, I told myself. The mind sees patterns in the dark. Hey, have any of you ever been driving alone at night and seen something in your peripheral vision that just vanishes? That feeling where your logic fights your instinct. It's the worst, isn't it? The road began to feel wrong. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches like skeletal fingers scraping the roof of my car. My headlights illuminated mile markers that were oddly pristine, their reflective paint gleaming too brightly. But the numbers, they weren't sequential. I passed 47, then 12, then 89. A deep, cold knot formed in my stomach. I tried to turn around, but every dirt driveway or Forest Service road I passed was blocked by a freshly fallen tree or a mound of earth that looked deliberate. I was being funneled forward. Then the radio crackled to life. Not a station, but a clear, calm voice from my own car's Bluetooth system. Ava, it said, a man's voice, familiar in a way that chilled my blood. You left something behind. Static swallowed the words. I fumbled, jabbing the power button until it went silent. My hands were trembling on the wheel. The false safety came at what looked like a small roadside gas station. A single fluorescent light buzzed over two old-fashioned pumps. Relief flooded me human place, light, a way to ask for directions. I pulled in, the gravel loud in the stillness. The building was dark, the windows boarded up, clearly abandoned for years. But the pump I rolled up to was clean, modern, and the display lit up with a cheerful insert card. This was impossible. As I sat there, paralyzed, my dashboard lights flickered. In their greenish glow, reflected in the windshield, I saw him. In the passenger seat, a man in a dark coat, his face blurred and indistinct, like a smudged photograph. He was just sitting there, looking forward. I screamed, whipping around to face an empty seat. But the smell changed. Now, it was the sharp, clean scent of my father's old cologne. A scent I hadn't smelled since his funeral a decade ago. A memory, vivid and unwanted, flashed. My father teaching me to drive on this very type of country road, his laugh, his hand on the emergency brake. The memory felt warm, but its sudden intrusion here now was horrifying. I slammed the gas, leaving the eerie station behind. The voice came back, not from the radio this time, but from the back seat. You forgot me, Ava. It was my father's voice, but wrong, layered with static and a profound sadness that felt like a physical weight. You have to remember to move on. I was sobbing, my vision blurring. I did remember you. I screamed into the empty car. I mourned you. The road ahead seemed to be dissolving into a thick, gray fog that my headlights couldn't penetrate. And then, the memories that weren't mine began to flood in. Not images, but sensations. The cold slip of a wedding ring off a finger. The taste of hospital antiseptic. The sound of a car door closing, final and absolute. They were echoes of loss, but not my loss. They belonged to the road. The road was a sponge, soaking up the grief and panic of everyone who'd ever traveled it lost and afraid, and it was feeding them to me. The climax happened when the car finally stuttered and died, rolling to a silent stop in the middle of the lane, swallowed by the fog. The dashboard went dark. In the utter silence, I heard breathing from the passenger seat. Slow, steady. I couldn't look. I knew if I looked, I would see a composite of every forgotten traveler, every unresolved goodbye. claim the last pieces of my own history to add to its collection. My own past began to feel slippery. My mother's face, my best friend's name, they were fading, being overwritten by the echoing sorrow of the highway. A cold hand settled over mine on the gear shift, not to harm me, but to share its chill. The voice, now a chorus of whispers, said, "Stay. Be remembered with us." With a surge of primal terror, I didn't fight the memory it was pushing on me. I leaned into it. It was the memory of my father's final moment, a moment of pain and fear id always blocked out. I let myself feel it, fully, terror-blithe, crushing pain in his chest, the dizzying fall, the bewildered thought of my name. I remembered it, I honored its awful truth, and I screamed it into the fog-filled car. "I see you," I wailed, not at the entity, but at the memory of my father. "I let you go." The hand vanished. The whispers ceased. The fog outside thinned. With a click and a sputter, my car started, the headlights blazing to life, illuminating a normal wooded road. Dawn was a faint gray line in the east. I drove, shaky and hollowed out, until I found a main road and eventually my own driveway. I never told the police or my friends. What would I say? I got lost and was haunted by collective grief. I am safe now, I think. I remember my father with clarity, both the good and the bad. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm pouring a glass of water or turning off a light, I'll catch a whiff of wet earth and decay. And I have this nagging, terrifying thought, a question for myself, and maybe for you. When I finally do forget something important, when a cherished memory inevitably fades with age, will the road consider that a debt? And will it send something back to collect? Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill, that sense of something lurking just outside your own memories, then you understand. Please, give this video a like if it unsettled you. It helps more than you know. Subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell, because I have more tales from the edges of our world to share. And in the comments below, I'd love to hear from you. What's a memory that feels too sharp, too important to ever fade? Or one that feels like it's already slipping away? Stay safe out there, and remember, sometimes forgetting is a mercy. Until next time. Story 9. Why I never answer my phone at night. I am recording this because I think it's still in the house with me. The thing that looks like my grandmother. My name is Priya, and 6 months ago, I inherited my grandmother's apartment. Not her main house, the one filled with light and the smell of spices, but a small, separate unit above her old garage, a place Shed owned for decades, but hadn't lived in since before I was born. The family always called it the quiet place. Shed warned me, in her gentle, firm way, never to go up there alone. I was a broke grad student, the rent was free, and I was drowning in student loans. I ignored the warning. I'd spent my childhood feeling safe in her arms. How scary could a place she owned be? The apartment itself was a time capsule from the late 70s. All avocado green appliances and wood paneling. It smelled of dust, old books, and beneath it all, the faint, sweet scent of my grandmother's favorite sandalwood incense, which was odd since she hadn't been here in 30 years. First unsettling detail was the phone. A heavy, rotary dial phone, beige and corded, sat on a small table in the living room. It was disconnected, of course. The second was the single framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was a black and white picture of my grandmother as a young woman, standing in front of this very garage, but she wasn't smiling. Her expression was one of profound sadness, even fear. I'd never seen that look on her face before. The third thing was the mirror in the bedroom. It was an old, ornate thing with a tarnished silver frame, and no matter how I cleaned it, the glass always seemed murky, like looking through a thin layer of smoke. I settled in. The quiet was profound, a thick blanket that muffled even the sounds of the city at night. My first week was peaceful. Then the phone rang. A jarring, metallic brrrring that shot through the silence like a physical blow. I stared at it, my heart hammering. It was disconnected. It checked. It rang 7 times and stopped. I told myself it was a glitch in the old wiring, a crossed signal from a bygone era. But it happened again the next night, and the next. Always after midnight, always exactly 7 rings. I started sleeping with headphones on. During the day, I'd try to research the apartment, but records were scarce. My parents were evasive. Your grandmother had her private spaces, my mother said, her voice tight. Just if you hear the phone, don't answer it. It was the same warning, recycled. Too late, I wished I'd asked more questions. The escalation was slow, insidious. I'd wake up to the smell of sandalwood incense, strong and fresh, though I owned none. The murky mirror would sometimes, in my peripheral vision, seem to show a figure standing behind me, tall, slender shape that wasn't my reflection. When I'd whip around, the room was empty. I began hearing whispers, not through the phone, but in the corners of the rooms, just below the threshold of comprehension. They were in a language I almost recognized, something my grandmother had hummed to me as a child, but twisted wrong. So, I have to ask you all something, because this is where my own curiosity really screwed me over. What's the strangest family heirloom or story you've ever inherited? Something that just felt off. For me, it was that phone. I became obsessed with it. What was on the other end of a disconnected line? The false safety came 2 weeks in. The ringing stopped. For 3 whole nights, there was only silence. No incense smell, no whispers, no shadows in the mirror. I felt a flood of relief so intense it was dizzying. I convinced myself I'd been stressed, imaginative, haunted by my own guilt for ignoring my grandmother's warning. I decided to reclaim the space. I bought plants. I played music. I even draped a pretty scarf over that gloomy mirror. I called my mom and told her I was fine, that the place just needed some life breathed into it. She was quiet for a long time. Priya, she finally said, the quiet wasn't for the apartment. It was for what's inside it. It likes the quiet. The night after that call, the climax began. I was jolted awake not by sound, but by its absence. The usual ambient hum of the refrigerator was gone. The world was utterly, profoundly silent, as if it'd gone deaf. And then, from the living room, the soft, slow, crunching turn of a rotary dial. Someone was dialing the phone. One digit. Pause. Another. A deliberate, agonizing sequence. I counted. 7 turns. I couldn't move. I lay frozen in bed, my blood like ice. Then, from the old phone in the living room, I heard the receiver lift. A hollow, empty line sound, the hiss of dead air. And then a voice. It was my grandmother's voice, but not the warm, melodic one I remembered. This was a dry, papery whisper, scratched out of the void. Priya, I am here. I am in the mirror. The bedroom door, which I always closed, began to swing open. I saw a figure in the crack of the hallway light. Tall, slender, wearing my grandmother's favorite sari. It stood perfectly still. The phone receiver in the living room clattered to the floor. The figure took a step, its movement jerky, unnatural, like a puppet learning to walk. It stepped into the doorway. The face was my grandmother's, but stretched, waxy, the eyes dark and depthless holes. It smiled, a terrible rictus grin that showed too many teeth. You didn't answer. It whispered with that same dry voice, though its mouth didn't sync with the words. So I came out. I screamed, scrambling back against the headboard. The thing mimic tilted its head. Don't you know me, Beta? It cooed, using her term of endearment. It took another step into the room. The scent of sandalwood was now overpowering, cloying, mixed with the smell of damp earth and old paper. I remembered the photograph, the fear on her face. She wasn't afraid of the apartment. She was afraid of what shed locked inside it, a thing that wore memories like skins. The mirror wasn't a mirror, it was a door. And I had stopped being quiet. It lunged, not with speed, but with a terrifying, inevitable glide. I rolled off the bed, hitting the floor hard, and scrambled on my hands and knees toward the bedroom door. A cold, dry hand closed around my ankle with shocking strength. I kicked back, my heel connecting with something that felt brittle, like old branches. It hissed, a sound of static and broken glass. I wrenched free, stumbled into the living room, and made for the front door. I didn't look back. I fumbled with the locks, my hands slick with sweat, expecting that cold touch at any second. I burst out into the cold night air and didn't stop running until I was 3 blocks away. I am at a cheap motel now. The police were useless. They found nothing. No broken door, no sign of intrusion. Just a clean, quiet apartment. They suggested stress, but I know what I saw. I went back once during the day with a friend. The scarf was still over the mirror, but when I pulled it away, the glass was clear for the first time. Perfectly, normally clear. And reflected in it, standing right behind me where my friend was the tall, slender shape. My friend saw nothing. I left the key on the counter and never returned. But last night, the motel phone rang. A old, corded phone I hadn't even noticed on the nightstand. It rang 7 times. I didn't answer. This morning, the smell of sandalwood is seeping through the air vents. It learned my silence, and now it's learned how to travel. So I am recording this, maybe as a warning, maybe just so someone knows. It's not about answering the phone. It's about being heard. And now, it always knows where I am. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill down your spine, you're not alone. The unknown is often the most terrifying thing of all. If you enjoyed this tale, please give this video a thumbs up. It helps more people find these stories. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a new descent into the dark. And most importantly, tell me in the comments, what's the strangest family heirloom or story you've ever inherited? I read every single one. Stay curious, but stay safe. Story 10. What the cabin inherited from me. I never should have opened the letter from the lawyer. My name is Lee, and I am here to tell you that sometimes the most terrifying things aren't what you find in a place, but what that place finds in you. It all started 2 weeks after my grandmother's funeral. The grief was a hollow, quiet thing, softened by the fact that we weren't particularly close. She was a stern, private woman who lived out her days in a remote family cabin deep in the Adirondacks, a place Id visited exactly once as a sullen teenager. So when the formal envelope arrived, I assumed it was just a final notice, some paperwork to sign. Instead, it was a deed. Shed left the cabin, and the 20 acres of dense, old-growth forest surrounding it, solely to me. Not to my parents, not to my more successful cousins. To me. The letter included a single, handwritten line on a separate slip of paper in her spidery script. It's time you knew the roots of this family, Lee. Don't be afraid of the quiet. The drive up was beautiful. All fiery autumn leaves and crisp mountain air. Id packed for a weekend of cleaning, assessment, maybe a little hiking. The cabin itself was exactly as I remembered. A 2-story structure of dark, weathered logs, nestled in a clearing that sunlight struggled to fully penetrate. The key was under a mossy rock, just like Shed said it would be. The first unsettling detail was the smell. Not the damp, closed-up smell I expected, but a dry, sweet scent like old roses and turned earth. It was pleasant, but somehow specific. The second was the state of the interior. It braced for dust and decay, but it was spotless. Floors swept, surfaces wiped, the old wood stove polished. It felt maintained, not abandoned. The third was the silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was a thick, swallowing silence, the kind that makes your own heartbeat sound like an intrusion. I chalked it all up to my imagination, to grief, to the strangeness of being alone in a dead woman's home. I spent the first day airing the place out, though the strange, sweet smell persisted. I found her library, shelves crammed with leather-bound journals and obscure botanical texts. One book lay open on a desk by the window, as if Shed just stepped away. It was a handwritten ledger detailing the care of plants. But the names were unfamiliar. Sorrow's Anchor, Widow's Heart, Memory Moss. Weird, but Grandma was always into her gardening. That night, I built a fire. The woods outside were pitch black, a wall of ink. And that's when the whispering started, not from outside, from the walls. A soft, susurrating murmur like leaves rustling or distant, overlapping voices. I muted the podcast I was listening to. The whispering stopped. I unmuted it. The whispering returned just beneath the audio. A coincidence, I told myself. The wind in the eaves, old pipes, but there was no wind, and there were no pipes. This is where I have to ask you guys something. Have you ever been alone in a place and heard something you just couldn't explain? A voice, a footstep, a whisper that seems to come from inside your own head. Comment below, because in that moment, I would have given anything to know I wasn't the only one. The second day, the escalation began. I went for a walk in the woods, following a faint path behind the cabin. The forest was preternaturally still. No birds, no squirrels, just that heavy, watching silence. And then I saw them. Carvings on the trees. Not initials or dates, but intricate, spiraling symbols cut deep into the bark. They looked old, the wood swollen around them, but they also looked tended to. Clean, free of moss or lichen. I reached out to touch one, and a jolt, like static electricity, but colder, shot up my arm. I yanked my hand back, my fingers numb. That's when I noticed the plants at the base of the tree. They were the same unusual ferns and dark-leafed herbs I'd seen sketched in Grandma's ledger. They grew in a perfect, deliberate circle around the trunk. My unease curdled into a solid, leaden fear. This wasn't gardening. This was cultivation. I rushed back to the cabin, my breath coming in sharp clouds. I decided to leave, first thing in the morning. This was too much. The inheritance wasn't a gift. It was a responsibility I didn't understand and didn't want. That decision brought a wave of false safety. The whispering in the walls ceased. The oppressive silence lifted, replaced by the normal, gentle sounds of the forest evening. I felt silly, paranoid. I made dinner, watched a movie on my laptop, and actually laughed. See, I told myself, it's just an old, lonely house. You spooked yourself. I went to bed feeling almost peaceful. I was woken at 3:07 a.m. by the sound of digging. Not animal digging. Purposeful, rhythmic SHHK thud of a shovel piercing earth. It was right below my window. My blood turned to ice. I crept from the bed and peered through the glass. The moon was bright, washing the clearing in bone-white light. The clearing was empty, but the sound continued, relentless, metallic, and wet. It wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from inside the walls. I stumbled back, pressing myself against the far wall of the bedroom. The digging sound moved, traveling along the interior of the cabin structure, from the front wall to the side wall, heading towards the living room. Then it stopped. A new sound replaced it, A slow, dragging scrape, like something heavy being pulled across the floor below me. I was frozen, a statue of terror. Then, a whisper, clear as day, right by my ear. It was my grandmother's voice, but young, strained, and terrified. "It's not me it wants." I don't know how long I stood there. The cabin fell silent again. The false safety was a cruel joke, and the terror that followed was absolute. As dawn's gray light filtered in, I knew I had to get to the root of this. I spent the morning in a frantic, trembling search. I pulled books from shelves, emptied drawers. In a hidden compartment beneath the floorboards of her bedroom closet, I found it. Not a journal, but a birth certificate. My grandmother's. And next to it, a small, dried bundle of herbs tied with black hair, and a faded photograph of a woman who looked exactly like me, standing in front of the cabin, wearing clothes from a century past. The name on the birth certificate was different. It wasn't her name. On the back of the photo, in that same spidery script, it read, Aliner, 1912. The first root. The pact holds. The pieces, horrific and impossible, clicked into place. Cabin, the land, the cultivated plants, they weren't hers. They were alive, and they had a taste, a lineage. The family wasn't just blood. It was a sequence of caretakers, of offerings. The cabin didn't belong to the family. The family belonged to the cabin. She hadn't left it to me out of love. Shed left it to me as the next in line, the next route to anchor it, to feed it with my presence, my memory, my life. The whispers were the previous ones. The digging was the land, restless, preparing a place. For me, I ran. I threw my bag in the car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine roared to life. I sped down the dirt track, tears of relief blurring my vision. I was out. I was free. I'd sell the land, burn the papers, never think of it again. I made it to the main highway, the civilized world, a beautiful, welcoming sight. I stopped at a diner, ordered coffee, and tried to steady my nerves. I went to the restroom to splash water on my face. I looked in the mirror, and there, just behind my reflection, faint but unmistakable against the sterile tile wall, was the swirling pattern of the carvings from the trees. I spun around. Nothing. I looked back in the mirror. It was gone. A trick of the light, a stress-induced hallucination. I almost believed it. I drove the 8 hours home to my apartment in the city. The normal sounds of traffic, my neighbors, the hum of the frigid heat, were a symphony of safety. I slept for 12 hours straight. The next morning, I called a real estate lawyer. I began the process of severing myself from that place. For a week, life was normal. The horror of the cabin began to feel like a bad dream. Then, this morning, I went to water my modest collection of houseplants. In the pot of my old, resilient snake plant, a new shoot had emerged overnight. A strange, dark green vine with tiny, thorn-like protrusions, and a single, closed bud that smelled faintly, sweetly, of old roses and turned earth. I haven't left the city. I haven't gone back. But as I sit here, telling you this, I can feel a faint, whispering draft in my sealed apartment, and I know, with a cold certainty that settles in my bones, that some roots travel farther than you'd ever think possible. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill, that sense of something being just wrong, then you understand. Please, if you enjoyed this tale of deep woods horror and dark family secrets, give this video a thumbs up. It helps more than you know. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next descent into the terrifying unknown. And tell me in the comments, what's the strangest family heirloom or story you've ever inherited? Thank you for listening and spending part of your night here. If you enjoyed this narration, please leave a comment, like the video, and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. And if you know someone who enjoys falling asleep to rain and dark stories, please share this with them. The rain will continue. Rest well.